This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Rick Henderson, editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal, not Carolinian. That's not even in publication anymore, is it? Anyway, Chris Fitzsimon, political analyst, Syndicated columnist and author John Hood, and former Lieutenant Governor Dennis Wicker. Well, welcome to the 998th edition of NC Spin. On this program, we're going to discuss the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and where it stands. We'll ask who should pay for Duke Energy's rate hikes and discuss whether Tuesday's Senate elections in Alabama send any kind of message to us in North Carolina. Plus, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's begin. The Atlantic Coast Pipeline has been controversial since first proposed and was due to begin construction in 2018. But North Carolina regulators refused to issue an environmental permit for a planned compressor station to push gas downstream. A growing chorus is saying the project needs to be canceled altogether, but many advocates are indicating this refusal to approve a permit won't significantly delay the project. Rick Henderson, what is the future of the pipeline? Does it pose an environmental hazard, as some suggest, or is this just a hiccup in the construction plan?
Well, it's almost certainly going to go forward because it's very difficult since the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has given the okay for it, and Virginia actually has done much of its approval. It's going to be very, very difficult to stop it. What is going to happen right now is that you're going to see the Department of Environmental Quality here continue asking questions about the possible impact to water supply and air supplies. And again, this is probably an appropriate thing for the department to do because this is something that's a new project. It's an infrastructure project, to be sure, but we haven't had anything of this magnitude along this area. But they'll do it, and I think it'll eventually get approved, but I don't think it'll be delayed very much.
Chris, the NC Department of Environmental Quality, which is responsible for these permits, is headed by a career environmentalist, Mike Regan, who was also former Southeast Regional Director for the Environmental Defense Fund, former official of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Is there any suggestion?
In other words, he has a lot of experience.
Well, I was going to say, is there any suggestion that perhaps he's an environmentalist and trying to prevent or delay these permits?
No, the suggestion is that he's a credible person with an expert in his field, and that's why the governor of North Carolina appointed him to this job. I do think the momentum for this, because of Virginia and other states, is on the way, but there's a lot of issues here, not just the compression station. There's water quality issues, there's water quantity issues. They're going to have to use municipal water along the way to flush out the pipeline. Another big issue that's come up lately, and I'm a little surprised there hasn't been a bigger deal about it, is the use of not only regular eminent domain to seize people's land along the way, but the quick take process. And so a lot of people who used to be interested in property rights haven't been quite as loud about this case because they really want this pipeline to be built.
And Dennis, the pipeline has already started entering into lawsuits with people that will not negotiate and settle with them for running the pipeline across. Is that going to create further delays for construction?
Well, yeah, it'll create some delays, but I think Rick is right. I think that it's going to eventually get all sorted out. And I was reading the paper the other day, Tom, and it looks like to me, and sounded like to me, that some of the landowners weren't too overly concerned about these lawsuits. It sort of had some quirks to it. But at the end of the day, I think this pipeline is going to go. But to Chris's point, I'm glad we're doing it a little slower and a little more methodical and thorough, because it's a very important part of eastern North Carolina that's going to be impacted by it environmentally.
John, I'm sure you've seen these TV ads with officials from rural communities throughout North Carolina really advocating and supporting the pipeline. They almost lead you to believe that there's some chance it's not going to be built. Is that the case?
Well, they're trying to make sure the objections that are thrown in the pipeline's way do not succeed. This is more or less a popular project in most of the areas where the pipeline would directly serve business or, of course, in this case, have to do with power generation. If you look at the stance on the pipeline from some of the more liberal groups in the state, that they are apoplectic about it. And I think part of their frustration, I mean, they did throw up this kind of odd complaint that conservatives had not stood up for property rights, which probably the first time they've discovered this issue.
The first time conservatives haven't.
That's not correct, because of course eminent domain, while dangerous, this is exactly what it is for, literally for public use.
Take people's property in quick take without giving them due process.
They do get due process in this. The process. This is a 150-year process. There's nothing new about it. Taking eminent domain to give to a private developer is outrageous. Using eminent domain to create a pipeline or a road is pretty much what it's for. But the other part of this is I think there's a lot of frustration that there isn't more opposition to the pipeline.
Really?
Yes, because a lot of the left believes that this is facilitating more reliance on fossil fuels.
Yes.
Fossil fuels are destroying the planet. Right. How dare we do the pipeline? I think for most North Carolinians, this is a strange argument and is not persuasive.
Well,
because natural gas, for example, has much lower emissions than coal. Natural gas has a lot of other uses. Natural gas has helped America and much of the Western world reduce its emissions of pollutants and of carbon. So it's an odd complaint, but they're making it.
Okay, well, let's take that argument on its face. Is there such a thing, Rick, as renewable energy sources that could be delivered on a large scale that would substitute for a natural gas energy source?
No, not now. I mean, maybe in a generation or two, but not now. And the problem that you have is if you're trying to replace the pipeline, which is going to deliver large volumes of natural gas. And one reason some of the communities in the eastern part of the state are very excited about this is that they think it's possible that this is a necessary but not sufficient source of energy for some industrial projects that might come in. Now, that's not saying they're going to happen, but it will be. But you can't do that through renewable energy because the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine.
Dennis, this pipeline is basically going to run along parallel to I-95. Now, most urban areas in the state already have natural gas. But rural areas in North Carolina, eastern North Carolina, and we've lived in some of them, have long bemoaned the fact that they don't have natural gas and feel like it may have hurt them in not being able to locate industries there. How big an issue is this for rural North Carolina?
Well, it's a huge issue, and I think that's why it has been more popular than they probably had anticipated. To John's point, rural areas want natural gas because they feel like that economic development will never be there. There'll be no activity until they get it. It's probably in the top 3 of whenever industry comes and looks at a place. They want to make sure you have adequate natural gas, highways, water, and natural gas and sewer. But I got to tell you, let's get it right. I mean, when we're doing this, let's get it right. This is a major project. We want North Carolina to be preserved on it.
Chris, one of the things that Dominion Resources and Duke Energy, who are the owners of this pipeline project, say that there are going to be a dozen or more power generation plants that are going to stem from this for the natural gas. Is this part of what the environmentalists are, is this part of what concerns them?
I think there's a whole lot of concerns. There's endangered species arguments, there's water quality arguments, I mentioned the water quantity arguments, there's worried about the compressor stations, there's worry about how the decisions were made, whose property it's going through. Not all of them are trivial concerns. Some people really are losing a significant amount of property, and I don't think the process has been fair. So that you have a wide gamut of objections. And I do think, you know, it's fun to say that the sun doesn't always shine, but there are also a thing called batteries that are being developed in the world that can hold solar energy and wind energy. And some of the same people pushing the pipeline are some of the same people who have been opposing increasing wind farms and increasing solar energy production.
And Tom, it does bother me a little bit that once again, one of the poorest counties in the state is going to have to house this compressor, which
That's not a coincidence.
Well, you know, Northampton County is going to be the host of that. And it seems like that a lot of things stop in those kind of counties. This compressor could be it could create a lot of danger and environmental problems. That does bother me, quite frankly.
Who should pay Duke Energy's rate hikes? We're going to ask that question after we take this break.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Agriculture is the backbone of our state's economy. It's the heartbeat of our rural communities. Its strength means bustling sidewalks and open signs in store windows. And with smart investments in our future, like the Plant Sciences Initiative and modern updated research stations, agriculture will remain the cornerstone of our economy. Because when agriculture is strong, our economy is strong.
For more than 45 years, the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association has advocated for local and state government retirees. Whether protecting retiree benefits or fighting for cost of living adjustments, more than 70,000 members count on us to be their voice. Government retirees work for us, and we stand for them. Learn more at ncrgea.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
In 2014, Duke Energy was required to close all its coal ash ponds outside power plants around the state. The company is now before the State Utilities Commission asking for a rate increase. But hearings on this increase are focusing on who should pay the cost of cleanup of those coal ash ponds. Should it be the shareholders or ratepayers? Dennis Duke says the rate increases won't pay just for the coal ash cleanup, but will help it in moving to natural gas instead of coal-fired generation plants. But the question remains, who should pay? Should the increases be paid by shareholders out of dividends or from those actually using the electricity?
Well, it's ironic. We just talked about the pipeline that's going to carry the natural gas to these areas. Now we're talking about cleaning up the coal ash. You know, this is a situation, Tom, you could argue it round or flat. I actually think that responsibility for paying it could lie both with the shareholders and also the consumers. But here's a question that I think has been ignored. This is a one-time cost, the cleanup. You know, it's going to be a one-time cost. Well, I want to know what's going to happen when the cleanup is complete. Does that mean the rate will go back down or have downward pressure to be cut some because no longer is that cost going to be there? And whether or not it's baked into the rate base. So that's a very, I think, valid question to be asking.
Let's go to this subject, though, of converting more over to natural gas. There's three basic ways of generating electricity, John. We've got coal plants, we got nuclear plants, and we got natural gas plants. Now, the state's pretty well ruled out nuclear plants because of the cost of construction and the waste problems with it. The coal plants, we say, are harming the environment, and besides, we've got these pesky problems with the coal ash residue. Doesn't that pretty much leave us in the position that natural gas needs to be where we go?
Well, for base load generation, natural gas is where lots and lots of people are going. Now, you did leave out a couple of options that we do have a little bit of hydro and we have a little bit of renewable. The hydro, it can be essentially base load generation. Renewables, until Chris's magical batteries come on the market, renewables aren't quite there yet for base load generation. You can use them to peak. You can use them because when it's really sunny and it's in the summer, you have higher power demands, but you're gathering solar energy. Wind sometimes aligns with usage, sometimes doesn't. So this is really a base load question. Now, I think that it's reasonable to go to natural gas, though keep in mind that natural gas is a commodity that's purchased in a market, and no one can if anybody could accurately predict the market for 5 or 10 years, they become a zillionaire. So it is likely, but not guaranteed, that natural gas prices will stay at their current rate. If they shoot back up, that could change the math of this. But the fundamental point is, remember, just a few years ago, North Carolina utilities were looking at additional nuclear capacity, both in North and South Carolina. In fact, they started a very expensive project in South Carolina and then pulled out, and that is something that's argued to be folded into the rate base, something that never will come into place. So even though I think it is reasonable to move towards natural gas as North Carolina and the rest of the world is, keep in mind that there are unanticipated consequences and lots of future events are yet to be understood.
All right, let's get a little deeper in this. Essentially, we in North Carolina benefited from the fact that coal-fired power plants were cheaper generally to build and operate than the primary other ones of nuclear and so forth. So the question goes back again to this issue of who should pay these rate hikes based on this.
Yeah, well, I think part of the discussion should be or will be around whose responsibility was it when the Dan River, when Duke didn't do its job and have the adequate technology in place. Now they can say they cleaned up the spill, but I think that showed sort of the flaws in the technology that we were using. I think that at the very least, Duke should bear a significant portion of the cost and maybe pass on a little bit.
Now
to the
that's the shareholders.
Right, right, that's
okay.
right. Well,
right.
right, the shareholders. Not the ratepayers. I think the consumers, I hope, are held as harmless as possible. I think everybody expects to get a small increase.
Rick, Duke's response to that point, which is being vocalized very frequently, is look, when we built these coal ash plants, they were built using the latest up-to-date technology, and these dams that were built and the ponds that were built were the latest technology at the time. Those who are trying to criticize Duke's management, Duke says, wait a minute, this wasn't a management issue, this was really a technology issue. But should they have perhaps modified or changed that technology over time?
Well, part of the fact is that the environmental regulations and the environmental effects often aren't known for a long time. And so what Duke has got to deal with now is to some extent a negotiation with the Utilities Commission and the like to say how much are they going to be able to pass on to the ratepayers, how much are they going to have to absorb in non-dividends to their shareholders and the like. And it's the sort of thing where technology changes, where we learn things that we didn't know before, and as a regulated monopoly that has a guaranteed return on investment, that's sort of the price that people pay.
You've watched all of these rate hearings in times past, and typically they come in asking for a high number, and by the time it's all over and done with, the Utilities Commission comes back and it's a negotiated number, which is substantially higher than what they asked for. You expect that's what we're probably going to see here?
I expect we are. We've seen that play many times in the past, and I would suspect that it's probably in play now. But I do think they got a problem here because there's got to be enough generated revenue to take care of the problem, and it's a multi-billion-dollar problem. So they may have some real numbers in there, but I do think it'll come down from what they're asking for.
There's no question about the cost that's going to be involved, and in addition to that, there's a $2.6 million cost for legal fees.
Now, I'm for that. That's a good idea.
Prosecute this rate case, all of which, by the way, is going to be passed on to the ratepayers. Well, I'm sure this is something we probably will talk about again before the case is settled. We want to remind you that our December 31st edition will be our last you'll see on this network of stations, and that beginning January 19th, NC Spin is moving to a new network with better coverage and air times. Starting January 19th, NC Spin will move to UNC TV and will air on Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. and again on Sunday afternoons at 12:30 p.m. You'll still get the same balanced debate for the Old North State from your seasoned panel of analysts, and we hope you'll move with us beginning January 19th on UNC TV. After this break, we're going to ask, what impact does the Alabama election have on North Carolina?
NC Spin will return after these messages.
With today's tools, all the information you need is just a click away.
I'm going to show you how to remove the...
And as a member of an electric cooperative, you have access to lots of valuable tools. Tools that help you do it yourself when it comes to controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad. Discover how your electric cooperative can help you control your energy use at EmpowerMeNC.com.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
We all watched the special election for the U.S. Senate that took place in Alabama Tuesday. For the first time in decades, a Democrat won in this deep red state, and some are describing it as the Alabama earthquake. Chris, there's no doubt this was a special election with distinct issues, but is there anything here that North Carolina can take away from this outcome?
Well, I mean, I think on the one hand, you had maybe the most extreme candidate that a major party has on either side has had as a nominee in a long time. That's putting aside the sexual misconduct allegations. Even before all that, he was removed twice from the Alabama Supreme Court for disobeying the federal federal Constitution. He said Muslims shouldn't be allowed to serve in Congress. On and on and on. He's a very extreme candidate. So on the one hand, that you could argue that, and the Republicans are probably happy that he's not elected. On the other hand, it is another rejection, I think, or another reinforcement of the Democratic, maybe, I don't know if it's a wave, but clearly the momentum is with the Democrats. When you add in the Virginia special election, the Democrats have gained 30 or 40 legislative seats in the few states that have had them now in this last year and a half. So it sort of fits into the narrative that a Democratic year is coming.
Well, I was getting ready to say, Rick, what they did was put together a coalition of women, minorities, and millennials, and got a record turnout from them for an off year or special election. How hard would that be to accomplish in North Carolina?
It would not be impossible to accomplish in North Carolina, and as Chris alluded to, it's an off-year election. Usually doesn't go well for the party that controls the White House, and that's North Carolina's record, is that the White House does have something to say about that. And you've also got a situation in which you've got both parties that are divided. You have neither one has a unified message right now, and so the question was turnout, and that's what happened.
Dennis, a lot of people are saying this was a victory for both parties. Republicans won because they didn't have to face Roy Moore in the Senate. The Democrats won because they elected a senator. You agree?
Well, I have to agree. I think there was probably that noise to the north was a big sigh of relief in Washington, D.C. Because of the results of last night's election. But I really think our Republican Party now has to do a lot of soul searching about what happened in Alabama. And it really was, I think, where the Democrats have the challenge of not getting too confident, not getting giddy, but coming up with some new ideas and some fresh ideas to go forward with.
John, 2018, of course, is going to be an election year in North Carolina. We got the Congress, we got the legislature. The legislature did away for primaries for judicial candidates, and a group of Democrats this past week filed a lawsuit saying that's unconstitutional. You agree with them?
I doubt it. I haven't read the pleading entirely. I did read the description of the argument, and I'm not sure there's any precedent for arguing that primaries or political partisan primaries are constitutionally required. But I mean, they're making a novel argument. We'll see what happens. I think, by the way, the Alabama lessons for North Carolina politicians or anybody are pretty basic. Number one, if you've got a president in the 30s, your party's going to get in trouble. Number two, don't nominate creeps. The only people they can beat are crooks.
Instead of it's the economy, stupid, don't nominate creeps. All right, well, we're going to be obviously talking about that throughout the coming year. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, "Come on, we're leaving."
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
A week ago, we attended the annual meeting of the North Carolina Farm Bureau up in Greensboro. And I can't tell you how many people came to me and said, Tom, the part of the show we love the best is tell us something we don't know. Dennis Wicker, we'll start with you.
Tom, did you know that more and more people are starting to buy their groceries online? I mean, they even have them delivered to their houses. Well, here's what you probably don't know. It's a loser for them. You take companies like Amazon, they lose money by delivering groceries to people's houses. But here's where they win, advertising. It's really an interesting concept.
How do they win with advertising?
They advertise when you go online. They advertise things, and that's where they make their money.
The eyeballs.
I got you. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
The National Employment Law Project, I think it is, just did a study of barriers to re-employment for people who are coming out of prisons and jails. North Carolina did not fare well in that study. We were second worst in the Southeast in this regard. And real quick, about 1 million North Carolinians have an arrest record, which kind of surprised me, that number. And about almost a quarter of our
10%.
About a quarter of our occupations are licensed, and a lot of those licenses forbid people who have arrest or conviction records. So it's a real problem that I think the left and right could cooperate in fixing.
That's almost 10% of our population.
I think it's about 15%.
That's right. Wow. Chris, tell us something we don't know.
State School Superintendent Mark Johnson has gotten some publicity for criticizing DPI, and there's an audit, even though it's sort of gotten off to a slow start. But one of the things he criticized them for was last year not spending $15 million left over for the Read to Achieve program, not giving it to local schools. Well, it turns out the decision that he couldn't do that was made by the governor, by the budget office under the McCrory administration, which was headed by a person who now works for Mark Johnson at the Department of Public Instruction. So he's complaining that DPI didn't do something that his current employee said he couldn't do while she was working for the Republican governor just a few months ago.
What a tangled web. Rick Henderson, tell us something we don't know.
Most recently, the Pew Charitable Trust put together a report looking at the states and how they're dealing with the situation of rainy day funds and how well insulated states are from the next recession. North Carolina was the only state in the nation that met all of its benchmarks for best practices for surviving the next recession. So we're in the position where unless it's another great recession or worse, we probably won't have to raise taxes.
At the beginning of the show, I mentioned mistakenly that Rick was with the Carolinian, and then I said, well, the Carolinian's not publishing anymore. Of course they are. And he's with Carolina Journal. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.